There's a sucker born every minute, and two to take him. So we're kicking off a run of looking at another stretch of pseudo-serialized classic Doctor Who stories. Last time I did this, I was covering the Trial of a Time Lord. This time, we're going with something a little bit earlier, that being The Key to Time. Now, I say pseudo-serialized because The Key to Time is ultimately pretty episodic, episode by episode, and the overarching thing is just that the characters are looking for parts of a MacGuffin that is going to factor into the quote-unquote overall story. But each individual story is actually pretty much completely self-contained. So it's less serialized than Trial of a Time Lord, but still kind of, sort of, more than classic Doctor Who usually was. The first part of that is the Ribos Operation. This one actually is important not just as being the kickoff for this arc, but being the introduction of a new companion. This one being Romana de Vortrelunda, better known as Romana. Although, like, when she gets introduced and the doctor's like, that name is too long, I'm going to call you Romana. And she says she doesn't like that. And he says, it's Romana or Fred. And she says, call me Fred. And he just goes with Romana anyway. I kind of would have preferred that she be called Fred. I think she'd have been a really good Fred. Regardless, this is the first introduction for the initial incarnation of Romana, played by Mary Tamm, not the longer-running and better-known incarnation of Romana that would later be played by Lalla Ward. So we have her introduction. K9 is also around for this. And we have the Doctor being given a mission, not by the Time Lords this time. They are slightly involved insofar as they seem to be supplying him his new assistant, aka Romana, but he is being summoned by the White Guardian, who tells him that he needs to acquire the pieces of the key to time, because that will allow the White Guardian to do something very good with it, but he also has to be sure to keep it out of the hands of the Black Guardian, who will do something very bad with it. It is pretty much that vaguely defined. It's not super well explained. Although, there is one line from the White Guardian that I really do love. And it just goes in this delivery of the Doctor asking, so what happens if I don't help you with this? The White Guardian goes, nothing. Nothing. Yes, nothing will happen. Ever again. I love the flatness of that. I quite enjoy that. But other than that, like, it's just an excuse to tie things together, and it's the reason the Doctor ends up in the various places. He's going somewhere to find a piece of the key to time, because they're all going to be disguised as something else, usually a little bit more mundane, but, you know, maybe it's something that is prized in this world, maybe it's something no one's going to notice, but he has a little detector to help him find it. It basically works as like a radiation detector, even kind of has the same noise going for it. So they land on the planet of Ribos. Now, Ribos is, it's one of those settings that it's another planet. It's set in a castle. It's kind of medieval-ish in terms of its technology level. And like, honestly, the initial stretch of this episode, it's kind of boring. It's hard for me to nail down exactly why, but sometimes a more medieval or almost historical feeling setting that isn't explicitly Earth, that also has some sci-fi stuff going on, you know, characters who have traveled between planets and stuff like that can work for me. It doesn't really on this one. And it's hard to nail down why. I think part of it is that the supporting cast doesn't really work off the bat. By, I'd say, the third episode, 3rd out of 4, they do start working. Like, they kind of settle into their roles, and some of them grow on me in a way that's like, actually, I like you. I like having you around. And that is a nice thing that you kind of grow with them, but it does still make those first 2 episodes a little bit of a slog. The supporting characters being primarily 4, and it's 2 sets of 2. You have the Graf, who is this sort of exiled from the empire he was ruling, interstellar warlord, effectively. It's largely hinted at he was a tyrant, he was awful, and he went off to make war, and somebody else managed the throne while he was gone, and when he came back, his people were like, actually, we don't want you back. You suck. So now he's trying to rebuild his resources, and he believes that this planet could be used as a staging place, and later on he believes that they have resources here, particularly a mineral that he believes could allow him to get back the power that he lost. He also has his sort of right hand, who's for, again, the opening stretch, kind of dull and just sort of there to be the one commanded to do the dirty work. Their dynamic gets a little bit more interesting, and the graph sort of gets more. Dimension isn't really the way, like, he's bad guy. Like, that's just, he's here to be bad guy. But, like, he gets more interesting in terms of the performance as it goes on. When he first shows up, he's just chewing the scenery in a way that isn't completely working. But as it goes on, he seems to calm down a little, and there's enough of a interesting dynamic between him and his right hand that we see more shades of later on, that by the end he was working for me. But again, initially it's like, okay, you're just the scenery chewing bad guy. I get it. And I think part of the reason he doesn't, I was less able to roll with the fun of that, at least initially, is like, you have no actual power. So you're just going about bellowing, and you're not actually threatening right now. Later on, there are ways in which he becomes threatening, but initially he's like, okay. Like, I think I'd compare this actually to Iron Gron and Blood Axe from the Time Warrior, which was a Third Doctor story. Those two are great right from the beginning, partly because Iron Gron is established as a threat already, and then he gets involved with Lynx, who is a Sontaran, and things get even worse, and he's already got an interesting dynamic, whereas the Graph, it's like, okay, you're just a wandering around bellowing guy. Like, it feels like an inferior version of that dynamic, at least initially, but it develops some shades later on. The other two is there's a pair of con men, an older guy and a younger, newer, almost kind of apprentice con man, and I like con stories. I like con jobs. I just do. So these two, especially as you got to know them better and got a better sense of what it was they were doing and the way that they bounce off each other, because like the younger guy hasn't done as many jobs, and he's trying to bring a little flair to it, but the other guy's like, what are you doing? And there's a fun dynamic with him that again gets kind of peeled back as it goes. So I'd say that as a story, the second half of this is pretty fun. Not amazing, but pretty fun. The first 2 out of the 4 episodes, is a little bit of a slog. It also has your standard janky monster, which just does not look very good. And it's not quite as adorable as something like, say, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. It's just, there's like just enough that works that it makes the bits that don't stand out. Like the head they have for this thing and the jaw. And it's like, that's not too bad. But then it moves its foot and like the toes with the claws jiggle. And it's, oh, right, okay, fine. And it's, it's just there. And there are also some interesting things done with the setting later on as well. So I kind of mentioned initially the setting isn't that interesting either. But later on, the younger of the con men, he's hiding, and he runs into like this old guy. And there's kind of this extended thing that if the performers hadn't been engaging, and been good at sort of drawing empathy out of me, this scene could have been a slog, but I ended up quite liking it. This guy who's, just denounced as a heretic, and he's basically living homeless on the street because this is a planet much further back in its development, its understanding of the cosmos, and he thinks that the pinpricks out we see at night are stars like the sun, and there are many, many more of them. And basically this guy's Galileo. And he's been sort of banished and trounced on, and nobody listens to him. And there's actually a really sweet scene between him and the younger con man that, again, I don't want to act like the performers are pulling off Shakespeare. Like, it's a little bit overwrought. Like, this heretic guy, he's performed a little bit like a Terry Jones character from Monty Python. He made me think of that. But it still works because there's enough humanity in it, and the way the two play off each other, there's just a good human chemistry between them that I ended up quite liking. So it does pick up later. Romana, I think, if memory serves, because I have seen these episodes before, I just haven't reviewed them before, I we'll see if my memory holds true. But to my memory, this is kind of the worst episode for Romana because her initial introduction is very much doing the book smarts versus street smarts thing. Like she thinks she knows everything because she got higher scores on tests than the doctor, and like she knows all the book learning, but it's, oh, we're gonna show this smarty pants that it really you got to get out there and get the street smarts like the doctor has, and it's a very tired, boring dynamic. Thankfully, even by the back half of this episode, she is starting to ease off. She's become less arrogant, less uptight, less, well, I know how this should go. Like just less of that archetype. And my memory is that this is the worst she is on that metric. And like on paper, it makes sense, to basically portray the doctor as someone who is, scrappier and more sort of DIY, taught himself sort of thing. And to contrast him with someone who's very learned, but very inexperienced. But ultimately that just feels like a very tried out, tried and true dynamic that just is not that interesting, like at all. So I hope my memory stays true in that they don't hit that dynamic on the nose this hard in the other stories that she's in. I don't think they do. I hope not. Because other than being a very tired dynamic that I don't find that interesting for the most part, it also like has a slight, it wasn't intentional at the time, I'm sure, but it has a slight tinge of anti-intellectualism to it. Like, I'm not saying this is the case in this story, because it's not. But broadly speaking, it's not that big a leap to go from, oh, well, yes, sure, you've done lots of book learning, but there's a lot out in the world that you still have to learn. It's not that big a leap to go from there to these stuck-up academics. They don't know anything about real living. Real smarts doesn't require any of that, but they think they're better than us, damn elites. And again, this episode doesn't go there, but it's another reason why I don't like that dynamic. It leans into real-world stuff that I see that is real ugly. And again, it's not doing the same thing, but it's leaning in that direction, and I don't love it. But even setting that aside, I just don't think it's an interesting dynamic in and of itself. And again, I'm not saying that's what this episode is doing. It doesn't go that far with it. I'm just giving another reason as to why the flavor of dynamic that this is like, I really have no use for it, even aside from being bored with it at this point. K9 gets a few scenes that are nice. He actually plays off Romana quite well. I do like the two of them together. And other than that, it is half of a decent episode. It just takes so long to set everything up and get the pieces in place to start actually having fun that it does make the first half of this thing a bit of a slog. The back half is decent though. If you can get through the first two episodes, then you're on to better stuff on the back end. And I guess overall, if something's going to be the stronger stuff, better it's the back half so that you're like, oh, well, it got better, as opposed to going, oh, well, it fell apart. Started good, but fell apart. So like, it'd be great if the whole thing was good, but if it's not going to be, I suppose it's better for the back half to be better. Yeah, sure, why not? So, the Ribos Operation. Have you watched it lately? What'd you think about it? What are your thoughts on the Key to Time story overall? Obviously, I'll keep bringing it up as I go through it. It'll probably be mostly addressed as an overarching story when I get to the very end and we get to the Armageddon factor. But whatever your thoughts might be, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills, enables me to do this as my living. But even if you can't help me out that way, don't worry too much about it. We take a relaxed attitude around here. You can just come on back next time you need a break. Now to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfula, Goddess Elida, Oliver B., Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Jean Foray, Ulrich Bogdan, Loki Eris, Melinda Walters, Jen, Auntie Kate 808, Becky Sparks, Bernabi Likes the Poodle, Tracy Scrappett, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, White Bearish, Rosalind Bennett, Toka Blahuvian, Pau Barabajagal, and Mara G.
Thank you so much for your support. You can get your name said, maybe even correctly, in the Patreon support tiers. Also, it helps me feed these little buggers.